All right, today we are talking about using central business configuration to activate and configure business processes in the S/4HANA Cloud Public Edition development system tenants. So let's jump on over to our learning journey first. I'll send you this link in chat just in case you don't already have it. If we scroll down here, we are working through this course, Implementing S4 Public Edition. And we are now in Unit 6, which is Configuring Business Processes with Central Business Configuration. Now, in real life, for the actual implementation, keep in mind that as a line of business specialist, so you're an expert and you're implementing for finance or for sales or for sourcing and procurement, you are implementing in a line of business area. Keep in mind that really the only thing that you do in central business configuration is right here, defining product-specific configuration values and then transporting the configuration so that it shows up in the development system tenants. And then, of course, you transport and release those to test and then to production. So you are actually not going to be involved in these activities. These activities are done by basically who we call kind of the lead configuration expert. So this person who's not necessarily a line of business specialist, but they basically pick up all of the loose ends. They would be running things like, in terms of fit to standard workshops, they'd be running the organizational structure workshop for sure, because they are actually responsible for setting up the organizational structure in CBC. Okay, so really only one person can do these activities in central business configuration. Like literally, if multiple people were trying to do the same thing at the same time, one would lock the other person out. So I do think it's very important for you, if you're a line of business consultant, to get an idea of what happens in CBC. And what is happening prior to you logging in and entering your configuration values. So it's still important information, but it's not necessarily a task that you're going to be doing unless at some point you were to step into that lead configuration expert role. Okay. Now, in this unit, this is a pretty big unit. We cover a lot of information here. In this unit, we also have a lot of tutorials. So there is a whole dedicated team that maintains the central business configuration solution. I mean, literally, it's looked at as its own product, right? It is something we use to activate content and enter configuration values and build the organizational structure for S4 Public Edition, but it is not part of S4 Public Edition. So they actually have their own product management team, and they're really good about creating a lot of tutorials that essentially walk you through how to do those activities in a simulated version of a system. So I'd really highly recommend you spend some time going through this unit if you haven't already, because basically for every topic that's introduced, there is then a corresponding tutorial that you can work through and you can get a feel for how you would do that thing in a real system. We also actually do have a live system for central business configuration. It's this one, this practice system for hands-on practice for CBC. However, there's only about, I think there's only about 60 user seats in that one right now. That's in comparison to several hundred user seats in the S4 system. So just keep in mind that this system is a little bit harder to get a practice system for, just because those user seats tend to fill up pretty quickly. And there's also usually about a week of downtime every month when they're resetting and refreshing everything in that system. Okay. Keep in mind also that CBC system activities are not part of the certification. The certification only focuses on system activities in S4 Public Edition, again, because not everybody ends up needing to be using central business configuration. Really, one primary user does the majority of the activities there. Okay. All right, let's get started. So if you were in our session last week where we talked about how to activate content in the starter system using central business configuration, some of this stuff is going to look pretty familiar just because the way that we say create a workspace, activate business processes, those things are essentially the same. Okay. The only big difference is that when we create our workspaces that are connected to our development system tenants, we are selecting that this workspace is called an implementation workspace. Whereas with the starter system, those workspaces were evaluation workspaces. So basically, they have slightly different capabilities than the implementation workspace. The implementation workspace is specifically meant to be connected to a system that is used live by the customer, and it's one of their permanent systems, right? Now, we still have to create two separate workspaces because one workspace can only be connected to one single tenant, not a system, a tenant. Because, of course, within a system, you can have more than one tenant. And for us, with our development system, we have two specific tenants. We have the customizing tenant of the development system, and we have the development tenant, which is that kind of ABAP landscape of the development system. So this lead configuration expert needs to set up two different workspaces, and basically all of the activities of activating content have to be done twice. There's no way to copy between the two of them, so we just have to walk through this process of setup two separate times. So we start off by creating our workspaces. There's one workspace that is going to be connected to the customizing tenant of the development system, and then one that's connected to the development tenant of the development system, which is very much a mouthful. Then we define our scope. We need to select the deployment target, which is, of course, the connected tenant. So where is this content going to be activated? I would always recommend activating content in the customizing tenant first, because that, of course, is your main project. That's where we do the majority of our work. Like 99% of our work is done in that customizing tenant. So that's really the most important one to set up first. We select the scope bundle. You also have the opportunity at this point, because we would have already, through our Fit to Standard workshops, defined our finalized business process scope. You also have the ability to just not select a bundle and choose the individual business processes that you want activated by uploading a file to the system. Okay, so that is an alternative. Otherwise, we can start with a basic bundle and add the additional processes we need. Okay, then we select our countries and regions. We have a special tool that we can use if the customer needs to use a country that is not covered by classic SAP best practices. We have a way of basically creating localized versions for countries like Aruba, or I almost said Aruba, or Bermuda, or Iceland. So countries that we don't have typical best practices for, we actually have a special tool called the configuration localization tool, which I will show you how to use as well when we're going through this process. We then have to select a group ledger. We can select both group ledgers if we have more than one country and that the different countries are using different group ledgers. Each country can only be mapped to one single group ledger, though. So it's not like you could have the US select both IFRS and US GAAP for that single country. Each country only gets one group ledger. Then we define the org structure and the finance settings. Now, the org structure is something that we build up from scratch because at this point, the lead configuration expert should have been the person who ran the organizational structure fit to standard workshop. So they know what the org structure is for the customer, and then you are going to use the org structure tool to basically click through and build that org structure up from scratch. We also are going to define the fiscal year variant and group currency. Those, once we define them, because they apply to the entire system, they're basically global settings that apply to the entire S4 system. Those cannot be changed after we complete this part of the activity. So after you define the fiscal year variant and group currency and save it, those are basically set in stone. Literally, we would have to re-provision systems and set up the project again if you needed to change those things. So fiscal year variant group currency, once they are defined, that is set in stone. Then, once the lead configuration expert is done with those activities, they can let the rest of the team know and say, hey, everybody else, I'm done with my part. All of the content is activated now. We're ready for you now to enter your configuration values. And as a line of business configuration expert, you would then log in and you would enter your configuration values that you gathered during the Fit to Standard workshops. Okay, so the configuration values is basically the data that needs to be entered into each configuration activity to make sure those business processes are working properly. A lot of the configuration values will be populating things like a drop-down menu. So, like, what are my options to select from in terms of work packages? That happens to be a configuration activity when we are setting up work packages on a professional services project that people get staffed to complete those activities that are in this kind of quote unquote work package. So, if the work package is integration activities and someone gets staffed to do that for a customer facing project, right? We would need to set up integration activities as a work package option as a configuration value. Okay. So those are the types of things that we're doing in configuration values. I see a question, can one company have multiple group ledgers? Yes, they can. Those group ledgers actually have to be selected in the initial scoping as well. So we'll take a look. We have a special drop-down menu that lets us filter by only the things that are mandatory to be selected during the initial scoping. So yes, there is an option to select for additional group ledgers, but that has to be done in this period of the initial scoping. All right, so we're going to start off, and again, we have to create two different workspaces. I would make the names match up with what the deployment target is going to be. So if your deployment target is going to be the development tenant, then enter that, something related to that in the title. Okay. Then if it's going to be the customizing tenant, have something like that in the title so people know, and it's kind of logically intuitive that when you look at that system, that that is the tenant that's connected. All right, let's go ahead and go into the settings area. Basically, central business configuration, when you log in, it kind of by default puts you into a workspace. It's like whatever the last workspace that was edited or was where you were working with, that is what it defaults to. So we always go to the settings area if we need to switch our workspace or if we need to create a new workspace. Now, this is a demo system, so I have way too many workspaces here. In real life, you would have at the end of the day, you would have four workspaces. Two workspaces would have been connected to those starter system tenants. And then the next two workspaces, the two that we're creating right now, are connected to our development system tenants. So we'll select this create new button, and only certain people should have permission to actually create new. So obviously, like any system, there are permission roles that we can set up. The lead configuration expert should essentially have the project lead role so that they can create new workspaces, that they can manage the entire project in CBC. Someone who's a line of business configuration expert, so the implementation consultants, you actually would have a different level of permission where you're not able to create new workspaces because frankly, you don't need to do that, but you would just be able to do things like editing values, entering information in this configuration activity here, because that's what's relevant to your job task. So you'd be something like a key user. There is a link that's in the course content, which I can grab during the break, that has the information about all of the relevant roles that you can assign people to make sure that they only have the access that they're supposed to have. So let's go into our title, and I would say something like, in this case, this is a demo, so we'll go demo, and then this is going to be implementation project, and then customizing. And we'll say in parentheses client 100, just to be really clear that this is going to be connected to our customizing tenant. All right, the workspace type, it actually defaults to implementation as the first option, and that actually is the workspace type that we're going to use. So implementation, again, implementation is connected to the development system tenants, evaluation is connected to the starter system tenants. So this is the implementation workspace. I'll select create, and now we've got our new workspace being generated. All right, I see some other questions about parallel line. We haven't gotten there yet. We will get to parallel line in the second half of the session today. So hold some of those questions because we've got a lot to cover and we'll go through it in order from basically start to finish. Okay, so the first two activities I see are in the scope and organizational structure phase. My very first activity is always to assign the deployment target. So that's where the content will be activated. So we'd select assign. Now, right now in this demo system, we don't have any available deployment targets to assign. So I cannot show you that specifically. I do have a screenshot of what it would look like if we select the assign button. And if there are tenants available, which there should be, The customer IT contact, as we finish the end of the explore phase, moving into the realize phase, the customer IT contact needs to trigger provisioning of the development system tenants, customizing and development. And then those workspaces would show up as being available deployment targets here. So you see the entitlement role, you've got one is customizing, one is development. So in our case, since I have named this customizing, because I want the deployment target to be customizing, we want to select that training customizing, that one right here. So I'd select my deployment target. This time you will not include demo data. So you will leave that checkbox unchecked. Leave that the way that it is because you do not need demo data in your development system tenants, right? We only needed that in our starter system. The development system tenants are the customer's real systems. So we will fill that in with their actual data, right? So we will select our deployment target, choose assign, and that's all you have to do for that activity. We would move on to the next step. The next step is to define the scope right here. We select open. If I'm the lead configuration expert, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take a look at Cloud ALM and take a look at our finalized scope in Cloud ALM. Because what should have been happening over the course of all of those fit to standard workshops is that every person who's an expert in each line of business area, everybody should have been essentially filtering things down. So in finance, there were probably some business processes that you demonstrated that don't actually, the customer doesn't actually need them. Like they don't actually use those specific processes. There are also sometimes processes that overlap with each other. So like there's two different ways of essentially getting to the same end goal. But those two processes, like the customer needs to pick which way do you want to get there? Do you want to do demand-driven replenishment or do you want to do Kanban in terms of manufacturing to make sure that you always have enough materials to keep your production lines running? Those two are two separate business processes. The customer needs to pick one. Most customers are not using both. They're using one or the other, but usually people have a preference for which one they like to use. So those types of things should have been filtered out over the course of our Fit to Standard workshops. That is part of the purpose of them, is essentially defining our finalized scope. So what I'm going to do as the lead configuration expert is I will go into this processes app. And in the processes app, anything that is listed for our project as being in the build phase, okay? And let's just select one of these other projects here, see if we can get anybody that's done some scoping in theirs. Okay, so normally we would see in this processes app, we would see a list of solution processes, and my project is way buried in here somewhere. So I'm probably not going to be able to find that. There we go. Here's an example. So here's an example of a project. You can see the status is in realization. Okay, so status of design, the status needs to change. So basically, as you finish a fit to standard workshop for each one of these scoped business processes, the consultant is going to change the status to it is now in realization, right? We've basically said, yep, we're finalizing this business process. We are going to use this business process in real life, in their actual systems, in the development system. Okay, anything else that's not going to be used, the status would change to basically filter it out. So I'm going to look here and I would filter by the status of realization. Anything that's listed as realization, those are the business processes that need to be activated in our system for central business configuration. Now, you still have the option to import scope from a JSON file. This JSON file is basically something you extract from the digital discovery assessment. At this point in time, I would not look at the digital discovery assessment anymore. Remember, the digital discovery assessment is just what the C-suite level executives thought that their business might need in terms of business processes. They probably selected too many processes in some areas, maybe not enough in some other areas. That's really common. That is why we do our workshops. That is why we finalize our scope. So the finalized scope should be here in Cloud ALM. Now, we cannot actually export this and import it into central business configuration. That would be really nice, but we can't. So what I would need to do is I would go through each one of those one by one, and I'd make sure that they're appropriately selected when I'm defining the scope here. The first thing that you're prompted to do, though, is actually to select your countries and regions that you're going to activate content in. So, first off, again, these are things that we should already know because they should have been defined as part of our Fit to Standard workshops. Let's say that we're going to go with the United States. Let's say that we're also going to go with Germany. Okay, so let's say that those are two initial countries that we're going to roll things out for. Now, the configuration localization tool is a method of taking our standard best practices and expanding them. So, our normal best practices would be anything that's in this list. Okay? Anything that's in this list is going to correspond with anything that is in the Process Navigator. So, in Process Navigator, the list of supported countries and regions is going to be the same as the list of countries and regions that we can select in CBC. Right? So if we take a look at Process Navigator and we select our countries drop-down menu, this page is being a little bit slow. There we go. So there's country and region. So whatever is in this list here, those are our supported, our SAP best practices, right? This is what we have best practices for. This is what we have, test scripts, and this is what we have the business processes supported for. So if we come back over here, that list matches up with this list. Those are considered SAP delivered local versions because we've got content for them. For an SAP delivered local version, what we do is we keep track of legal changes in that country, we keep track of compliance changes in that country, and we keep track of things related to financial reporting. Okay, so that means if there are any legal changes, compliance changes, financial reporting changes that affect the business processes for any of these countries, SAP deals with those. Okay, so let's say there's some legal change in Bulgaria where they have some additional reporting requirements in a specific line of business. We would address that. We take care of that. Okay. For anything that's in this list, we take care of those things. We make sure that the business processes are legal and compliant. Okay. Now, let's say that our customer needed to have a country region for Iceland, okay, or for Aruba or Bermuda, okay, for any of the countries that are not in this list. In that case, we would use our configuration localization tool. And it's not specifically named that. Like the way that we access the tool is just by selecting this button that says more countries/regions. This is CLT. This is the configuration localization tool. So it says use the configuration localization tool to scope countries or regions that are not localized by SAP. Select a target country region you want to configure and a source country region that meets your legal and scope requirements. Now, originally we thought that the source countries would be expanded. But at this point in time, it looks like they're just kind of sticking with Germany and there aren't any future plans to add any other source countries. So essentially, from a legal standpoint, from a compliance standpoint, whatever we're doing in terms of the maintenance of business processes for Germany, that is what would get mapped to the target country. So your only option for a source country is Germany. The target country will then inherit all of the business processes that are available that are supported for Germany, as well as all of the legal, finance, compliance related things that we take care of on a regular basis. So everything that you see in this list, these are countries for which we don't have our classic best practices or classic local versions for. Okay, so let's grab one of these from the list. Let's select Aruba, for example. So we need to create a company code. We need to create an organizational structure for Aruba. To do that, I need to create a localized version by connecting Aruba with Germany right here. So this is our configuration localization tool. The one thing to keep in mind is that let's say that there were legal changes in Aruba that affect a certain business process. Now, SAP is not responsible for dealing with that, right? If there are legal changes in Germany, obviously we'll address that because this is one of our localized countries that we support. So that is the only thing that the customer needs to be aware of, that anytime they create one of these target and source country mappings, if there are legal changes or compliance changes in that country that is now the target country, that's something that the customer needs to keep track of on their own. Okay. And if they need to extend a business process to address those changes, that would be the customer's responsibility because this is now considered a customer local version. So I'll select create target country slash region. It will give you a message. Customer implemented localization workspaces involve some risk. They might have certain effects on topics, but not limited to system data workflows, tax calculation, basically everything that I just said. So essentially, if there is some type of legal compliance change in that in that target country, then that is the customer's responsibility. That's what this message is saying. We'll select confirm, and then we should see this pop up here in just a second. And then we'd be able to select save. There we go. So now we've got our localized, our customer local version, and we have our SAP local versions right here. Go ahead and select save. And then we would move on to our next step. So next step, we can go to select languages. The languages are going to be just based on what the standard association of your kind of global language for, or I suppose it would be national language for that country. So obviously English is mapped to the US, German is mapped to Germany. Let's say that we also have a lot of Spanish speakers in our system. We can also add any additional languages that we need to here and select save. Now, if our customer doesn't have the full enterprise scope, so you see that we've got these three bundles of options here. If they are not using all line of business areas, I probably wouldn't select enterprise management because that turns on a lot of business processes. Let's say that they're just going to implement in the line of business areas of like finance, sales, sourcing, and procurement, because those are the three base that are always there, plus professional services. If that's the case, I would start off with the bundle of baseline accelerator, and then you can add any additional scenarios that you need. Okay, so baseline accelerator is basically just going to be the core like finance, sales, sourcing, procurement, and then you can add the business processes that you need in addition to that that are in professional services. Okay. All right, there are certain things that you can only select right now during what we call initial scoping. Now, in the future, as the customer is managing their system, they can actually always come back to the scoping activity and they can always activate additional business processes. And that's the way that this is designed because, of course, after release upgrades, new business processes get released. Okay, so this is how they would do that. Let's say that we're in the configuration phase, they can pull the project back to the scoping phase, activate those additional processes, check and see if any org entities need to be created to support the processes, check and see if there's any additional configuration values that need to be entered, which if it's a new business process, usually there are, and then finalize and activate the content in their connected customizing tenant of the development system. Okay, so that is this is not a one-time thing. Like you move forward and backwards in this process. However, there are certain things that can absolutely only be done during initial scoping. So to make that more clear, because that was initially kind of confusing, there's this new feature where we have this drop-down menu that says selection allowed. So if we select initial scoping only, this shows us the set of business processes that can only be done during initial scoping. So if we do not select these things now, you actually cannot select them in the future. Okay, these are the only ones. Now we have to select a group ledger. If I was to try to complete this activity without selecting a group ledger, it would actually give you an error message that says you have to select a group ledger before you can move on. That's just mandatory. If you've got multiple countries, you can select more than one group ledger. So say that we want to map the US GAAP group ledger, which is generally acceptable accounting principles, to just the United States, and we want to map IFRS to Aruba and to Germany. We could do that. Okay, we could have both of them turned on. So we could select add to both of these, and then we'd be able to choose the countries and regions. For these, because they can only be selected during the initial scoping, you'll see this warning message that literally says that this can only be added or removed during initial scoping and activation. If you don't select the scenario now, but you need it later, your system has to be re-provisioned and your project needs to be re-implemented. So it's just kind of giving you a warning message of what I've already said. All right, so we can add both of these, and once the two of them are added, I can then choose my countries and regions for which they're going to be mapped to. And we might have a little bit of a quirk in our demo system because normally countries and regions becomes available as something that I can say Group Ledger US GAAP would just be for the United States, and this would just be for Germany and Aruba. So normally in real life, you would be able to do that. We're just, it looks like having a bit of a quirk at the moment. Now, these other things, there's the question about additional ledgers, group valuation, asset accounting, and asset under construction. Those three are the ones that give you additional ledgers. So you need to determine how many additional ledgers you need. You can click the title of each of these. The title will link you into Process Navigator to see the description of that specific business process. And again, through our Fit to Standard workshops, especially whoever led the finance workshops, should be aware of how many additional ledgers are necessary. And so that information should have been entered into the processes area of Process Navigator. So if I'm the lead configuration expert, I'm activating all of this stuff. I should be able to just look at this menu. Anything that's in realization would be things that my colleagues have selected as finalized business processes after their workshops. So if there's going to be a requirement to have additional ledgers, I should see it in that list of the processes from Cloud ALM. So this is when we'd select it right now. Okay, next up, we would go ahead and complete the activity and close and move on to the next step. All right. Now it's actually not going to let me complete that activity because I don't have a deployment target. So there is no connected system that allows me to activate any content in it. I see quite a few questions. Can you elaborate further on work packages? A work package, that was just an example. A work package is something that is added to a professional services project to basically indicate the work that needs to be completed, and then you staff people to that. So like data migration could be a work package, and then you'd staff somebody who's responsible for data migration. Okay, we'll talk about parallel line after the break in the second half of the session. Is it one workspace per tenant? Yes, that's correct. One workspace per tenant. Can we import from the DDA first, since you already have somewhat of a matching scope, instead of doing it from zero? I mean, technically you can. I would just be careful with that because then it's more of a comparison of what was on the DDA versus what's in this processes app in Cloud ALM. I would just go off of this. I think it would probably be easier to just one by one make absolutely certain that you are selecting every single process that's in this list. But that's just me. And it kind of depends like how different, if through your Fit to Standard workshops, you ended up filtering out a lot of business processes that were originally selected on the DDA, it would probably be easier to just start with this. If it's actually still pretty close to what was selected on the DDA, then yeah, maybe it's easier to just import the scope from the DDA and then do some tweaking afterwards. And then if my source is only US, then how will it select the business process? If your source is only US, I assume that's related to configuration localization tool. So your source couldn't be the US. The source countries are only the non-best practice countries. So like Aruba, Iceland, Bermuda, the non-best practice countries that we don't keep track of, like the legal and compliance changes for. So your target country has to be Germany because that's the only option that you have for a target country. Then the source country inherits from the target country. So if your source country is Iceland, it would inherit the scope, so it would inherit all of the available business processes from Germany, and it would also inherit the same like legal and financial reporting standards. And so yes, your source country is whichever you want. I mean, it's whichever the customer requires. Okay, does CLT also work for creating new tax types or rates? Those types of things are going to be in the configuration activities, typically. So more detailed type things are going to be configuration activities. Okay, any relation that we should or that we can choose the source countries to the non-listed countries. So again, Germany is the only allowed target country. So Germany has to be your target country. Source country, you can select any country in that list. And then you mentioned that SAP is not responsible for the legal requirements for the target country. Nope, flip that around. Target country is one of our best practices. So the target country is Germany. That's the only available target country. The source country inherits from the target country. And in that case, again, with my example, like if there are some legal compliance reporting changes that happen in Aruba, where now businesses based in Aruba have to generate some additional document to provide to the government for tax purposes or whatever, yeah, that's something that the customer then needs to pay attention to and be responsible for. If this was for Germany, because that's one of our best practice countries, we keep track of that. And then we would build that additional compliance thing into a business process. Okay. Enterprise management, is it good to do in public cloud or is private cloud better for that? There are so many other factors outside of that. We would just, again, we come back to digital discovery assessment. The digital discovery assessment is used to identify whether public or private cloud would be a better fit for the customer. And at this point in the implementation, we're talking like we've already done fit to standard workshops. Now we're getting into the realize phase. We're actually implementing the system for the customer. We should already know which solution we're going with, right? So we're just focusing on public cloud right now. Okay. Yep, recordings get sent out by email 2 days after the session's complete. Is it possible to add additional countries later for new organizations that are either acquired or newly established? Yes, absolutely. That is the way this tool, that's the way CVC is designed to work. So we will get through all of this, like we will work through all of these steps today. Let's say the customer's running their business and they go through the next couple of releases and they acquire a new company somewhere. They would then go into CBC. You go back into the scope phase and you add that additional country that you need to build an organizational structure for. You select whatever, maybe there's additional scope, additional business processes that you need to activate. You can use CLT, configuration localization tool, at that point in time. That is the way that they manage their systems after go live, is that you flexibly basically move forward and backward through these activities. So you can always add additional scope in the future. And then is tax requirement part of the best practices for localization? If it is a best practice country, so if it is something that's in this list of what we have best practices for, then yes, we take care of those types of things. If it is not a best practice country, it is the customer's responsibility. So these are SAP delivered local versions, which SAP is responsible for maintaining. When you use the configuration localization tool, you are creating a customer specific version, right? So that means the customer is responsible for it. Can we have different fiscal year variants for two different companies? Nope, it's one fiscal year variant applied to the entire system. And then will we select enterprise management and public cloud, or will we use baseline? You will select whatever is in the processes list. So after the workshops in each line of business area, we will then have the finalized list of business processes that need to be activated in the customer system, right? So you're going to turn on those business processes. I was just showing you because there are these different packages. If the customer has like manufacturing and supply chain and transportation management, then it's going to be easier to just select the enterprise management bundle and then remove the things that you don't need and then add any additional things that you do need. If it's sourcing, procurement, sales, and professional services, it's going to be easier to just select the baseline accelerator and then add the additional professional services processes to that. But regardless, you are checking to see what has been finalized in our Fit to Standard workshops. Everything in that list is what needs to be activated here. And if I clear out this filter, we should see the rest of, so there's a lot more business processes in here that we were originally seeing. Okay. and they're just organized by their typical line of business area. So we just select the add button for each process that needs to be activated. And you don't have to scroll through this giant list. There's a keyword search up here at the top. So I would just go through this list and I would keyword search for the IDs of each one of these and press the add button for each one. Okay, does a workspace mean memory space in S4? No. A workspace it's like a container. So a workspace in CBC is the container that holds the business process content for what's activated in a specific tenant. So one workspace, one container can be connected to one tenant. So what we're focusing on first is always setting up the customizing tenant, right? Because the customizing tenant, that's our main project. We do 99% of our work there. We really only touch the development tenant of the development system if you need to do any work with ABAP, okay? Which for public cloud, it doesn't happen a lot. And then what if I select the initial scoping only scope items, but don't use them? So in other words, what's the harm if you select more than required? Yeah, there's really no issue with that. Basically, it comes down to what people are permissioned to access in the actual S4 system. So if you turn on a business process, but it's not configured and people don't end up actually having permission to those apps in the system because you don't create a role to give them permission to those apps, then effectively nobody would be able to know that those applications are actually available. Okay, and then if localization exists for a particular country but does not cover all of the legal requirements, what's the next steps? So I have this slide here. You start off with the customer local version with the configuration localization tool. So you create that target country match there so you can build an organizational structure for that other country. The last mile of extensibility would be done via the extensibility framework. So there's information in the help portal that talks about the country and region specific functions. There's going to be a combination of configuration values that you can enter to customize to tweak that business process. And then the remaining last mile of extensions can be done using our classic, custom fields, custom logic in S4. Okay, and then what are the KO criterias not recommended for public cloud? Sorry, I'm not sure what KO means. So if you need more than one fiscal year variant, if you need more than one fiscal year variant, that should have been identified back in the digital discovery assessment. The digital discovery assessment has some really detailed questions based on the scope that's selected. And one of those questions is, does the customer need multiple currencies? Or multiple, I mean, you can have multiple currencies in public cloud, but like you can only have one group currency that they all kind of roll up to. So if you needed multiple group currencies or multiple fiscal year variants, those questions are asked on the digital discovery assessment. So that customer automatically would be filtered out and they would be recommended and pointed down the path of private edition. Okay, if we have a development system, customizing and development tenant, is there a copy process for transferring configuration? Nope, because they're two separate tenants. So they don't talk to each other. They are two separate tenants. All right. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about in here is that you will see many business processes that actually include integrations. So anytime you see another system listed, like services extraction, just the word extraction, that's automatically like, okay, data's being pulled from somewhere, imported somewhere else. So that's an integration with DataSphere. This is an integration with a separate HANA system. This is an integration with SAP Data Intelligence. So we do have a lot of business processes in here that are integration based. For example, like payroll processing with SuccessFactors Employee Central Payroll. That's a really common one. Master data integration. Many of these are integration focused business processes. However, not every single business process that it also includes an integration is available in S4. Okay. So you're not necessarily like if you are the lead configuration expert and you are working through this list And there are just a few processes that you can't seem to find in here. That is probably because they are integration based and they just don't exist yet. So over time, we have slowly seen more and more integration-based business processes available in CBC that you can activate. Like this one didn't used to be here, and it's recently become available to activate. For those processes that simply don't exist in CBC because they're not available to be activated through this scoping app, all you have to do is create a case in SAP for me. So there are going to be some integration scenarios that are simply not available in CBC. That's okay. Anything you can't find in CBC, you go to the services and support dashboard in SAP for me. This is kind of an old screenshot. You go to the report a case area and you basically just list out these are the business processes that I need activated in my customer's customizing tenant and development tenant of their development system. Here are the IDs of those systems. Please activate them. Our support team will go into the back end of your system and they will activate those additional business processes on your behalf. You can then complete the activity and move on to the next steps. Okay? So if there's anything that you don't see in this area, those things, just make a note of those and create a case and submit those in through SAP for me. All right, the next step would be our primary finance settings. And again, I kind of have to jump around a little bit between my different systems to be able to show you everything. So let me go over here to this demo sandbox. And for primary finance settings in our starter system, we were not able to change the settings. By default, the settings are USD for group currency and the fiscal year variant is for special periods. Obviously, in your customer's real system, so in their development system, you can select their specific primary finance settings. Now, I don't actually have a project that has primary finance settings available to be edited right now, so I can just show you what it would look like. And it's just these two different areas for fiscal year variant and for group currency. So again, normally in real life, when you're setting up a development system in CBC, you are able to change and select other fiscal year variants or other group currencies. In this case, I can only show you something that has already been selected and confirmed. Once you complete this activity, this one will give you a warning message when you press the complete button because it will say, are you absolutely certain? Are you absolutely certain that you want to save these? Because once they are applied to the entire system, they cannot be changed. Okay. All right. The next step would be then moving into setting up the organizational structure. So let's select open. This page sometimes takes a minute to load. There we go. That was much faster. And then we should have a completely empty organizational structure. This should be completely blank in real life because, of course, we're not using any demo data. We are building up the customer's actual organizational structure from scratch. And again, this is why we want that lead configuration expert to be the person who runs the Fit to Standard workshop for org structure, because they're going to be the ones who are actually implementing the organizational structure. All right, so this is the org structure app. Let's walk through a couple steps here of creating our own org structure. Now, normally it's going to tell you that you have a certain number of units to create. It would say something like, you know, 12, 15, 20 units to create. Here's just a quick screenshot where it's more accurate. So it says units to create, and then it has a list of the mandatory units that need to be created. And again, those are going to be based on the countries that you have. So in this case, in this example, when I took the screenshot, I think we must have only had one country because it's just asking you to create each of these org entities just for the US. If you have multiple countries, you would see the IDs listed. So it'd be like US, comma, DE, comma, I'm not sure the country code for Aruba, like AR, if that's what the country code is, whatever we selected with CLT as well. So it will tell you what the mandatory entities are for your organizational structure. Now, that also means that let's say at some point in the future, the customer decides to go back into scope and activate some additional business processes or roll out things for a new country. Now, when we move backwards, like when we go back to the beginning in CBC, it's not going to affect anything we've done up until that point. It will just allow us to basically reopen things. And then we need to move through like in order from top down through our subsequent steps. So let's say that we built our org structure. They've been running their business for a couple years. They decide to roll out their business, a new office in a new location. So they would go back into scoping. They can add that additional country and they can add the scope for that country. Then this activity for org structure and for configuration, those get reopened. Primary finance settings are set in stone, so nothing happens there, nothing changes there. But basically, what will happen is we will need to go back through the org structure and configuration activities again because there will be new things that need to be created based on this new country that we've just activated. Okay. So it's very controlled. It's a very controlled system. It's going to make sure that you're doing everything you're supposed to and that you're not allowed to move from one step to the other until you have checked and verified and confirmed every single activity. So if you do need to activate any additional scope, you are then going to see that the org structure will basically get reopened. And if there's an additional unit to create, it will list it here. You will have to create those units. You will then have to confirm those units and complete the activity before you can move forward into configuration. The configuration area will likely also have a few configuration activities that are now listed as open, meaning that they need to have data entered in them to support the new business processes or the new country that you've activated. All right, let's walk through how we would set up a little mini structure in this particular app. So if we're looking at this app here, you see the status is currently in progress. We've got some things that have been confirmed. Once an entity has been confirmed, it cannot be deleted. Okay. We can still go in and edit things, like I could edit the text, but I can't delete anything that has been confirmed. So we want to make sure that we keep things in this non-confirmed state as long as possible until we are absolutely certain that we're ready to confirm everything. So non-confirmed entities can still be deleted. I can select this non-confirmed entity and I can successfully delete this. And it would also delete any relations that have been created. All right, let's go ahead and press this create button here. You'll see that and we'll start with the company code. So we'll give this an ID. We'll say 1710. And this would be, let's go US entity. And then we need to give this a city. Let's just say USA, and then a country and a region. And then, so I will select for my two available countries right here. I moved into a different system. I'm using a different demo system. That's why it doesn't show Aruba as one of the options here. And then we go ahead and we create a company that goes along with it. Okay, so select a company. And then in our case, we can go ahead and create a new company. So we'll give this an ID as well. 1710 US company and create. Let's go 1711. With the same ID and type, 1712. Can we do that one? There we go. So 1712, that one worked for us. And we will select create. And this is our new company code. All right, so 1712, this is my new company code that's been created right here. I've got two options. I have plant and sales organization. Okay, so this is basically the helper version where it's kind of guiding you through the process of how to build an org structure. You can also turn this off because as you're building multiple company codes, it can get really just visually very busy. So you can also select the simplified mode and that will hide all of those things. So I can see my company code that I just created right here, the 1712 in the simplified view. And instead of seeing those kind of dotted lines, those dotted outlines, I can select create and I can create my purchasing organization and my shipping point and all of those things this way. Okay, so up to you, depending on how you want to look at this, how it's easiest for you to look at. So next up, we will go ahead and we will create a plant for our new company code. So we'll go with 1712. Name is going to be distribution plant and city. Let's just go St. Paul. All right, select create. We've got our new plant, and we see that with a plant, we can create a storage location, and a plant is going to have multiple relations to other areas. Next up, we're going to click this button and create a sales organization. 1712. Name is going to be US Sales Org. City is St. Paul. Select create. And now we are going to need to create a purchasing organization. So I don't see purchasing organization in these dotted outlines here. You would actually see it if you scrolled all the way over and take a look at some of these other dotted outlines in this area. So we've got purchasing organization right over here. Again, if it's not in those dotted outlines, you can also select this button, create, and we see purchasing organization there. We will go 1712, name, US purchase org. We've got some max characters for these to work within, and then select the company code that we created earlier, which was 1712 right there, and create. All right, next up, we need to start creating some relationships. I need to create a relationship between the plant and the purchasing organization. So I've got my purchasing organization over here. I need to open up the plant that I've already created. So I'm looking back at this guy, 1712. I'm opening up the plant, and this kind of zooms in and just focuses in on my area. And now we've got these relations, plant to purchasing organization. Select the drop down, create an assignment, and now I see assigned purchasing org right there. Select save. And now we need to create a storage location. So we've got storage location in this dotted line area. So I'll click storage location. We'll give this an ID for our storage location. The name is going to be US storage location, St. Paul, and the subtype is going to be a day tank. Okay, select create. And then we need to create a shipping point. All right, so shipping point, I'm going to select the create button up here because I don't see it in the dotted lines in this area. We'll select shipping point, the ID 1712. Name is going to be US shipping point standard and city. The subtype is going to be standard, which is why I put that in the title right there. And country region is going to be US and create. You can have multiple, as you can see, you have multiple company codes for each country. A while ago, you didn't used to be able to have more than one company code per country, but now you can. All right, next up, we need to create a couple additional shipping points. So we also need a shipping point for customer consignment. So this shipping point is going to be 1713 because it needs a different ID. And US shipping point consignment, St. Paul, and subtype is customer consignment. Country region is US, and select create. All right. And then we will create a distribution channel. So again, select create, distribution channel. ID here is only 2 digits. So we only have 2 digits to work with. Let's go with 70, see if I can use that one. And then US distribution channel. And got a max character limit right there. And now we are creating a division. So create and division. Also only have 2 digits, so 70. This is going to be US division. And then we have a sales area. So sales area is not in this list. For sales area, I need to go back to the larger org structure. And I need to find my company code that I've just created. So company code right there. Below sales organization, I now see this dotted outline to create a sales area. To create a sales area, the name of this, it's already got an ID assigned to it because it's already part of that sales organization. The name is going to be US, let's see, US sales area. Distribution channel, we'll select 70. And our division that we've already created, select create. And now we need to create some additional relationships. So we need to connect a few things. We need to create a relationship between the plant, the sales organization, and the distribution channel. So first, we are selecting this sales organization that we've already created. We will go into the Relations tab right here. And then you see Plant to Sales Org to Distribution Channel, create assignment, and I will assign my 1712 distribution plant right there. And then we see that because that's already been connected to its relevant distribution channel, that shows up and becomes available to choose. And save. Next up, we need to create a relationship between the sales area and the plant. So I'll select sales area, and we've got relations sales area to plant, create assignment, select 1712, save. We have not created a sales office yet, so we do not need to do that connection there. I'm also going to select the plant because we need to create a relationship between the plant and the standard shipping point. So we'll go plant. And actually, in our relations area, it looks like we've already done sales area to plant. So that's already good to go. Plant and then shipping point for customer consignment. So those other ones need to get connected here. Okay, let's come back to sales organization. Plant to sales org distribution channel. That one's already been assigned. Sales area is just the last thing that we haven't created. Now I'm just checking to make sure for these guys, do they all have the relations that they're supposed to have? So if I take a look here at plant, that has a relation that's already been assigned. Division. Oh, we might be a little bit frozen. Come on. There we go. Okay, sales area to plant, sales area to sales office. We don't need to do that. And let's check our distribution channel. For some reason, we seem to be freezing a little bit where we're not jumping over to distribution channel or division. Okay, so normally I would say that we would click into these areas and then this page would refresh. And once it does refresh, we should be able to see what we have the ability to connect. So let me try that one more time. There we go. That's what we want. So go into plant. We need plant to purchasing org, plant to sales org, plant to shipping point. There we go. That's what we wanted. Plant to shipping point for customer consignment. So we had our 1713 US shipping point consignment. Save. Plant to shipping point for return. We did not create a shipping point for return, but we did create a shipping point for standard, which is right there, and save. And it looks like we have most of these set up with their relationships. I'm not seeing any other relations in these other areas that need to be taken care of. All right. So that should be everything. That is everything. So that is our company. That is our little organizational structure that we just built here. Obviously, I didn't do absolutely everything because, in real life, you're going to have quite a few additional plants, other storage locations, the sales area, the sales offices. Those are some additional ones that we didn't do in this demonstration. But I just wanted to walk you through the process of how you create a little organizational structure from starting with the company code and the company and moving down into all of these other areas here. Now, because this is a demo system, people have been playing around a lot and there's all of these other things. It gets a little messy at a certain point. So this graphical view, you can expand it, and it kind of helps if you're working with a relatively large screen. This makes it a little bit easier to navigate. Turning on the simplified view helps a little bit because it takes away all of those additional dotted lines. So this is a little bit easier to see right here. The last thing that you can do is you can minimize this. We'll close out of this area. And then right up here, these two tiny little icons, this first icon that we have selected by default is the graphical view. So that's what we've been using. We've been using the graphical view. You also just have a basic list view. So once things get a little bit messy, sometimes it's just easier to look from the list view perspective. So we've got our set of 1712. We've got that US entity that we've created all in this area right here. Okay. All right. The last step is that as you create each additional unit that's required, everything in the units to create should update, and basically those units, as you're creating them, should go away and then they should move over into the units to confirm. Okay. So everything as I'm creating it, they should start disappearing from units to create and move over into units to confirm. So these units need to be confirmed before they would actually be published or activated in my connected deployment target. So again, in the customizing tenant of the development system. So we'd select this button to confirm just for demonstration purposes so we can clean the system up in the future. I'm not going to be confirming my entities. I'm going to leave them in the non-confirmed state. But what you're able to do is you can select this drop-down menu for the chunk of entities that you've created here, and then you can confirm all of those entities right here. So you'll notice it says once an organizational unit is confirmed, you cannot delete it. So we'd select confirm only when we're absolutely certain everything is correct, everything is good to go. So confirm those entities, then select complete the activity, and then we can move on to the next step. The final activity in the scope and org structure phase is deploying the scope and the organizational structure. So we just select this button to deploy. This is going to come up with a little progress bar because it takes a little bit of time to deploy all of the content in your connected deployment target. Because effectively what's happening is everything in the scoping that's been selected here for the different countries that you've selected and the organizational structure is being now activated in this deployment target. So this can take a little bit of time. That's one of those where you just sort of let the system do its thing, come back and check it in 15 minutes or so, and just see if everything's processed and finished activating all of the content. At that point, we can then move on to the configure your business processes stage. Okay. All right, some questions. Is there any way to move from any content from the starter system evaluation workspace to the implementation project workspace? No, there's not. They are two separate systems. They are not connected to each other. There's no transport path. The only possibility is that if you were to do some type of an ABAP extension in the development tenant of the starter system, you can use something called ABAP Git to basically extract that extension from the development tenant of the starter system and import it into the development tenant of the development system. That's the only thing you can do, but that's not even a transport. That's extracting something and importing. Okay, can it cause inconsistencies or issues if the development tenant has a different fiscal year variant and group currency compared to the customizing tenant? Well, you'd need to select both, or you'd need to select the same for both systems, because that just wouldn't make sense to have two different fiscal year variants in tenants that are supposed to be part of the same system. So you'd need to have the same fiscal year variant in group currency. And again, like realistically, from a customer perspective, they're going to have one fiscal year variant and one group currency. They're not going to have two separate ones. And if they do, we would actually have to deploy two separate S4 public cloud systems to support that. Because again, you can only have one primary group currency and one fiscal year variant that is applied to the entire system. And if they need many of them, they probably are not implementing public cloud. They've probably already purchased private cloud because public cloud wouldn't be the right fit. Okay, let's assume we start for a company code with a leading ledger only. Can I configure and add after go live a second local ledger? No, because the ledgers are attached to scope items that can only be activated in the initial scoping. So that's why I showed you in the defined scope area that you have this selection allowed filter. Okay. So there's certain things in selection allowed that can only be done during the initial scoping, right? So because this demo system has already been activated, it doesn't even show you group valuation or the asset depreciation. It's not even showing you the additional ledgers because initial scoping's already happened. Okay, so this is what it would look like if initial scoping's been completed. You can no longer activate those business processes. You literally have to reprovision and start over again. Okay, does a plant refer to warehouse, offices, mills, or cost centers? A plant is typically for manufacturing. So like a plant's going to be something that produces something typically, at least in my understanding. I mean, I suppose you could use it as like not what it normally is. I don't know that that would make sense. I mean, a plant is typically used in like supply chain manufacturing. That's where a product is being produced. And then storage locations are like where the finished goods or raw materials or semi-finished materials would be stored. And then how do you decide between creating one plant versus multiple plants? That's all based on the fit to standard workshop. So the lead configuration expert who's activating all of this content and building the org structure, that is the person who should have conducted the organizational structure fit to standard workshop with the customers. So therefore, whatever the customers tell them in terms of the org structure that they need built, that's what the lead configuration expert is building because this is their real system now. So you're not, you're creating whatever they said that they need created for their system. And if you confirm organizational entities that you didn't mean to, it doesn't always cause a big problem. I mean, you don't necessarily have to use them in the system. But again, like if you confirm an org entity and it was an oops, it was a mistake, then and you can't delete it anymore because you've already confirmed it. And if it caused a big enough issue, we would have to reprovision systems and start over with CBC. So the risk of selecting the wrong things would be if it causes a big enough issue, you have to reprovision and start with the whole CBC process again, which honestly doesn't take that long. You know, you can click through this in an hour or two and get a whole customer system set up and ready to go. So it's not that big of a deal in my opinion. I mean, obviously, you want to make sure that you set it up right the first time. You know, don't give yourself extra work, but it's not the end of the world if it has to be reprovisioned and you have to set things up in CBC again. Okay, can we change the deployment target after the deployment of scope and organizational structure? Nope, you cannot. Deployment target, as soon as it's selected and confirmed, it's set in stone, especially after content's been activated in it. Okay, we will go ahead and pause here. The last step is that we're going to move into taking a look at some of these configuration activities, but we're already past the top of the hour. So let's take about a 6-minute break. I have 14 minutes after the hour on my clock, so take a 6-minute break and come back at 20 minutes after the hour. We will pick up from there with configuration, and then we have a few other topics to cover, like parallel line. All right, take a break, come back at 20 minutes after the hour. And we are talking now about configuration values. There was a question about linking CBC activities in Cloud ALM. Yep, that should have already taken place. That's one of the tasks in the prepare phase under initial system access. So access central business configuration tenant, and then there should be somewhere in here, there should be, there we go, set up CBC integration to Cloud ALM. So this is the link to that activity. So hopefully that was already done. Okay, we are coming back into the configure business processes area. So this is actually the configuration or the CBC system that is connected to the S4 system that I use for demonstrations. So this is actually like the back end connected to our S4 system that we actually use. Now, our system functions more like a starter system, and that's the way it was set up. So it was set up with an evaluation workspace. So just ignore that. Pretend that it says implementation and that it's a real system. Now, what's really interesting is when you go into these activities, they will always open up in a new browser tab. And it's usually an indication with our systems. If something opens up in a new browser tab, it's usually pointing you to a different system. So a new browser tab usually means different system. Not always, but a lot of the time it does. And you can then take a look at the URL to see what system you've been basically kicked over to. So this one is clearly CBC because I see CBC in the URL right here. Now let's take a look back at our business-driven configuration questionnaire. And let's take a look at some of these items right here. So for example, one of the topic names or the SAP ID is basically one of the configuration activities that needs to be completed is this define work items and groups. There's also expenses, resources to resource types. I can just keyword search for the names that are in this column because the names in this column are going to match up with the same names in CBC. I can also just use the IDs. Either one works because they are both going to be there in our CBC system. So let's say that I just use the ID to search, and you can see it brings me to define work items and groups. This is the documentation. So if we open up that link, you can see it's actually kicking me over to a different system here. And what it's actually doing is it's kicking me over into an S/4HANA Cloud system. So you'll see that it says my, and then these are the numbers, the ID of the system, S/4HANA Cloud. Okay, so we went from CBC right here over into S/4HANA Cloud right here. You'll notice that we are in the customizing tenant of the development system. Well, for us, it's more like customizing tenant of a starter system, but it's a customizing tenant. And this is the documentation. So this tells you for this activity, we can create standard work items that are relevant for projects. Don't create work item IDs that begin with USR, as this is reserved for specific work items. So that's some good information for me. Create groups, and we can also assign work items to groups. The assignment of work items to groups enables project managers to filter and assign work items relevant to work packages. And here's a little example that they gave us. Okay, so that's the documentation. So it's actually kicked me over into my connected deployment target. Now, if I click into this activity, so by default, all of these activities are going to be open. And then as you finish them, you'd mark them as completed once you're done configuring them. We'd select this activity, define work items and groups. And again, new browser tab. And it looks like our URL here is S/4HANA Cloud. It says SAP GUI for HTML. You can see in the URL, it says IMG activity execute. So again, for those of you familiar with the implementation guide from private cloud and from on-premise, it is a lot of these configuration activities are the same as they are in on-premise or private cloud. It's just that we use CBC to enter our configuration values, whereas you would use the classic kind of SAP GUI, the customizing area, to enter configuration activities for on-premise and private cloud. But the IMG kind of concept is still there. This basically massive list of all configuration activities that can hold data to then populate it in the different business processes. So it actually is pointing me to my connected deployment target. The customizing tenant is the deployment target that is connected to this CBC workspace right here. Okay. Now, there's a reason why transports automatically release between CBC and the connected deployment target. So in this case, the customizing tenant, let's say it's of the development system. The reason is because when you're entering configuration values here, you're actually entering the configuration values not in CBC, but you're entering them directly in the connected deployment target. So when we talk about configuration values automatically being released between CBC and the deployment target, between a workspace and the deployment target, that's because effectively you are entering configuration values directly in the deployment target itself. That's why a new browser tab opened, because we're in a different system. We're now in our S4 system. So if I need to make a change here, I will select new entries, and I will give this an ID and give this a name. Let's say we have data migration, and we're freezing a little bit. There we go. Oops, that's not how you spell migration. There we go. So data migration. I will select save. And normally it will prompt you to do this. Now, we had this turned off in our system just because some of the people who maintain courses in other line of business areas, they do a lot with configuration activities and they work in that area quite a bit. And this prompting got really annoying for them. So in a normal system, you're going to then see this. As soon as you select save, it will prompt you for a customizing request. It will basically say, okay, you have now made a change. It now needs to be assigned to a customizing request, which is maybe slightly odd because you're kind of doing the change directly in your customizing tenant anyway. But that's the way that the system works. That's the way that the transports work. So you can either select from a list of existing requests that are available, or you can select this little page right here to create your own new request for, maybe I want to group these all under transport requests for professional services configurations. Okay, so maybe I just want to organize them that way for me personally. So I'd select this, I'd create a new request for professional services configurations, and then select the green check mark. Okay, so that means that anytime you make a change in that area, it's always going to prompt you to map those, to assign those to a configuration request. Okay, so it will always make sure that those things get set up in a transport log. Okay, you cannot, except for us where we turned it off. In a normal system, you can't bypass that. Every time you click save, every time you make a change here, it will prompt you to assign that to a transport. Okay, now we can go ahead and close out of this tab. And let's say that I've finished entering all of my configuration activities for work items and groups. If there's more than one of me, so like if there's multiple people for this line of business area, you would use these drop-down menus to kind of communicate with the rest of your team. So I would say maybe this is in progress while I'm working on it. And then once I have finished, I'm going to say that's now completed. That's ready to go. Those configuration activities have finished so that the rest of my team members know that one's done. We don't need to worry about it anymore. Okay. Your customizing requests are then going to be visible directly in S4. So let's go into our S4 system. We need to have the permission assigned to our user for business process configuration. And in business process configuration, there is an area for transportation. Oops, that is not what I was looking for. Let me jump over into just general transport management. There we go. Okay, sorry, that would be, so two different ways. We should be able to get there from administration and then transport management, or extensibility and transport management. That should send you to the same page right here. So, or the same space and page. So we've got export customizing transports. Anything related to stuff we do in CBC, so configuration values, entering, changing data in the configuration activities, those are categorized as customizing transports. When there is a release upgrade, part of the release upgrade is the content part of the upgrade, right? So if they've released a new application, if they have kind of changed a business process, those types of changes get released and published in central business configuration. Then they get released into the, in this case, what we're looking at is the customizing tenant of the development system. And this is where you see those things. So BC means business content upgrade. That was automatically released. That's automatically published on our release schedule. So BC upgrade, that one has already been released and made available. Okay. Now, our development system is connected to our test system and our production system through transport pass. So let's say we see some examples right here of things other people have done, like they've created some additional purchasing groups or item hierarchies or material groups. If those need to be released and forwarded to the next system, to the test system, you select this little bubble right here. You need to assign it to yourself in order to have this drop-down menu of release become available. So I'd select assign to me. And then I should see this drop-down menu for release available, release. I would check and then execute. That will then release it to the next system in line. Okay. Now, it doesn't automatically show up in the next system in line. So if I logged into the test system, this wouldn't automatically be there already because what I have to do is one final step. So let's say that this is the customizing tenant of our development system. And let's say I've released the configuration values that I've entered in CBC that are now in this customizing tenant. And I want to move those configuration values for my business processes to the test system. Now I would log into the test system. So pretend that I just logged out. I'm going to log into the test system. We actually use the same app to always import things. I'm going to use the import collection app in the test system, and it should show me a list of things that are available to be imported. Business configuration would be one of those things, customizing requests. Now, our actual training system is, like I said, it's a starter system. It's not connected to anything else. So it has no transport path. That's why it always gives me this error message and says transport or import is not supported for this tenant. It is not supported because the system is not connected to anything else besides CBC. So in real life, in your test system, you would see a list showing up and populating here. You would be able to see the type of collection. So is it a software collection for like custom fields, custom logic, so key user extensions? Is it a workbench request? If this was coming from the development tenant of the development system, if it was an ABAP change, those are workbench requests. If it is business configuration or customizing requests, those are things that come from central business configuration, configuration values. Okay. We would then select check and then import. Okay. Same thing to move to the next system in line to production. We actually use this import collection app. We would have this additional button that becomes available to then forward. So once we've imported things to the test system, we've tested it out, we can then forward them to the production system, log into production, use this exact same application, import collection. So pretend we're in this app in the production system, and then check and import again. All of those configurations will now be available for productive use. If you made an oops somewhere in there, if you had a spelling error in one of your configuration values, all you have to do is go back, make the change, then release that and go through the transport steps from system to system. So just make the edit and then transport that edit essentially from test to production. All right. The other thing that we have to keep in mind when it comes to business configuration is the fact that not everything actually transports. Okay. There is an application called Implementation Activities that lives within our S4 system. It actually lives in all three tenants. So it lives in development, test, and production. And in the Implementation Activities app, you'll be able to see that certain configuration activities are not transportable. So I'm going to use my little keyword search here, and we'll use our example of work items again. And you'll see that map resources to resource types and work items, both of those are not transportable, and therefore they are editable in all systems. So the last step to make sure that all of your configuration activities and values have shown up in test and in production is to check in the customizing tenant of your development system, check this application, and take a look at which of these are not transportable. Anything that's not transportable, you're going to want to open up another browser tab. So what I would do is if you have two screens, I would open up another tab in my browser. I'd pull that tab off to my other screen. I would stay logged in right here to my customizing tenant of my development system. On my other screen, I would log into my test system. And in my test system, I would just go into the Implementation Activities app, and I would open this up here, and I'd open the same configuration activity in my test system, and then I would just type it in my test system, right? Because this, for whatever reason, it doesn't transport between test or from development to test and then to production. So this one, whatever I've typed over here, that exactly as it's typed right here, exactly as it's spelled, case and space sensitive, all of that needs to be typed exactly the same way in this specific configuration activity in the test system. So that's the very last thing that you have to do just to make sure everything is taken care of and everything is addressed. Okay, that is how we activate content in the customizing tenant, as well as in the development tenant of our development system. The last topic we need to cover for today is called parallel line. I'm going to wrap up these last couple questions and then we will focus on parallel line. So question in a public cloud, oh, wait, any public cloud setup, is there any linkage with Charm or Solution Manager for transport creation for S4? No, there's not. And Solution Manager has an end of life date. So I would migrate away from Solution Manager into Cloud ALM as soon as possible because Solution Manager is going to go away and we're really focusing our development efforts on Cloud ALM. Okay, is CBC only connected to the customizing tenant? How does the enterprise structure and configuration, how is it made available in the development tenant? So everything that you saw me just do has to be done twice. Okay, there are two separate workspaces. So we talked about that at the very beginning because you can only have one workspace in CBC connected to one system tenant, not one system, one tenant of a system. So there would be two separate workspaces in CBC. In our example, we were just working through creating a workspace that's connected to the customizing tenant of the development system because that is the main project. That's where we do the majority of our work. So I would always focus on setting that system up first, activating the content in the customizing tenant first, but then you have to do all of this stuff all over again and activate everything, go through each one of these steps, scope, finance settings, org structure, configuration, as well in the development tenant of the development system. Okay. We've gotten the request for like, is there a copy feature frequently? I have heard that they are working on some type of capability of copying between them, between the two tenants, so you don't have to set everything up twice. But at this point in time, we don't have any type of a copy capability. When you use the export software collection app, that is specifically for custom fields, custom logic, custom business objects, anything within the extensibility framework. So in-app key user extensibility. Okay, question configuration, which is not transportable and needs to be maintained in each client, can be uploaded through templates. Nope, it's the way that I just showed you. Cannot be uploaded through templates. You have to go into, so what I showed you is the way that you manage this. We would go into we go into the implementation activities app in each subsequent system. So you need to go into the implementation activities app in test and in production. And whatever you have entered for those non-transportable configuration activities in the customizing tenant of the development system, these same things need to be typed into the configuration activities for test and production. Okay, in which tenant do we do unit testing? Config one? I'm sorry, I'm not sure what that question is asking. In which tenant do we do unit testing? Generally, you're typically doing a lot of testing. Like as you feed the configuration values in, you probably want to test out the business process. So assign yourself the relevant business role. Take a look at, are things starting to populate where they're supposed to be populating? Unit testing is informal because it's like a small test. You're just testing a chunk of functionality of a business process. So that's kind of ad hoc. It's just as you need to. And then what does it mean by BC? BC is business content. So business content. Display BC set. I'm not actually sure with this button. And this button doesn't seem to be doing anything right now. So for that button, I do not have an answer for you. BC is usually business configuration or business content. So I'm not entirely sure, but this button apparently is not working at the moment. And then can we use SSCUI for configuration? So SSCUI is an old term that we used to use. The term that replaces SSCUI is configuration activity. So they're not two different things. They're the same thing. It's just that now we call them configuration activities because self-service configuration UI was just overly confusing for people. Okay, we need to switch topics. We need to move over to parallel line so we have enough time to cover this. Let's go into parallel line capability. What we have been talking about thus far has been focusing on mainline. Okay. Mainline. The main line is basically the series of systems and tenants that are client 100. That's our main project. That's where we do 99.9% of our configuration work or just our work in general for our customer systems. So in your main line, you have your workspace in central business configuration that's connected to the customizing tenant of the development system. We also talked about how you need a separate workspace in central business configuration that is connected to the development tenant of the development system. Okay, so two different tenants in the development system, customizing and development over here. This is considered the development line. This is considered the main line because these are all the same client. So customizing tenant, we release transports to the test tenant, we import them, we forward transports to production, and then we import them. Now, just having these two lines here is kind of tricky if you wanted to roll out another country version. So let's say that the customer's fully implemented, they've gone live, and they've been live for 1 or 2 years, but now their business is expanding and they need to set up an office in a new country and they need to build a new organizational structure. What's helpful is if they're able to build this new org structure and activate business process content, enter configuration values, basically do an implementation for this new country separate from their main line. Because this is productive, right? This is what they're using for their actual system. Okay, if I were to make changes in this workspace for mainline, there's always a little bit of downtime when you are, say, activating a new country and that's being processed in this workspace. So activating a new country, turning on all the business processes for that new country, that always takes time to process that information before then it can be released over here, transport, import over here. Customers have been asking for a while to have some type of a separation where they can essentially do other rollouts, or they can even like test out other business processes in a place that's separate from their main line. So what the development team came up with is parallel line. This used to be called parallel project lines. Now it's just called parallel line. So parallel line is something that you can request ad hoc. This is likely something that you probably wouldn't be requesting over the course of an implementation because in the implementation, we're not yet productive yet. So there's not as much concern about, oh, we have to roll out our business in a new country version, and we want to keep that separate from our productive system. So this is probably not something that you'd end up having to deal with over the course of your implementation unless you are doing a multi-country rollout and you are doing one country at a time. If that's the case, this would be beneficial. Okay. Now, let's say that we've implemented in the main line for the US, but now we need to roll out for Germany. What we can do is go into SAP for Me. In SAP for Me, you can request a parallel line at no cost. So it's free to request a parallel line. You request a parallel line. There are some system prerequisites and like consistency checks, obviously, that take place. And basically, what the parallel line is it's a complete copy. It's an exact copy of your main line. So the workspace gets copied. This is a copy of the mainline workspace. The customizing tenant over here gets copied, and you get a separate customizing tenant that is a copy of this one. There's also a test tenant that is a copy of this test tenant. So this parallel line is designated as client 120. Now, let's say that we activate Germany. So we go into central business configuration, we activate our new country for Germany, we activate all of our scope items, we set up our organizational structure, we enter configuration values. We release all of that to the customizing tenant of our development system, which again is a copy of this one. Okay, we test things out, they're looking good. We release them to the test system. We do final testing of the business processes. Everything looks good. Then we can take the parallel line and merge it back with the main line. That will take whatever we've done over here and merge it, literally take the copy of parallel line and merge it into the main line. So now Germany will be activated in this workspace. All of the business processes for Germany would be activated. All of the org structure, the configuration values, everything we've done in this space gets merged into this workspace. Everything we've done over here gets merged over here. Okay. And I'm sorry, actually, no, that's not true. These two stay totally separate. The workspaces are the only ones that merge. That's pretend I didn't say that. Only the workspaces get merged. So the merge happens from this workspace to this workspace. Now I can take the content that's active over here in CBC and release it into my customizing tenant. Okay, release it into my test system, test everything out, do end-to-end testing one more time, make sure all of our business processes for Germany are working as we expect them to. Then we release it in production, and hey, now we're fully live, fully configured with our new country version, and it did not affect our other country that's already active that we've already been using productively at all. Okay. Then what you would do is you would delete your parallel line. Okay. Because you don't need it anymore, right? Let's say 2 years down the line, this business expands again. Now they need a new office in somewhere in Central America, let's say Belize. Okay. They can request a parallel line again. It will then take an updated copy of this workspace over here. This gets copied over here. This gets copied over here. Now we can implement for Belize. Once we're done with that, we can merge everything back from this workspace, merge it back into this main line, and then again do the transport process and go live with our next country. Then we delete that parallel line again. So it is for a specific use case. The biggest use case is usually rolling out additional country versions in that parallel line. It also gives you an additional customizing tenant and an additional test tenant. So maybe you use that test tenant for training users, right? It's an additional system. So why not use it as such, as an additional system? All right, so some of those customer use cases, maybe we add a new country, we extend the organizational structure, we extend the scope, so we activate additional business processes, we enhance the product-specific configuration, so add new configuration values, change existing, an additional data migration run, additional test environment, additional training environment, or building global templates. Okay, so those are the use cases for a parallel line. Parallel line again is requested via SAP for me. You can only request a parallel line if you have 3-system landscape. So first up, it's going to check these prerequisites. It's basically just going to make sure that everything in your CBC workspace is properly set up and like we're in a stage where it can generate a copy of that CBC workspace. And then it's going to do this thing called branch. So it does prerequisites first and then branch. Branch is literally the copy. So it just makes a copy of your existing workspace in CBC and then gives you that copy to work with. All right. There's 2 different ways that we can manage the content between the 2 of them. Generally, the general rule of thumb is that if you have requested a parallel line, use the parallel line for the purpose that you requested it for, and then get rid of it. Okay. If you keep a parallel line and a main line around for a long period of time and you're making changes in one and the other, you're just going to get a bunch of error messages because these 2 things want to be in sync with each other. They want to be aligned. So if I make changes in the main line while I have a parallel line and I'm, deploying a whole new all of my business processes for Germany in my parallel line, the main line's going to start to go, hey, I don't like that you basically have so much new stuff activated for this other country version. So it's going to start to go, oh, we've got discrepancies in our scope. We have discrepancies in our org structure because it sees that you have all of these things you've created up here that are not merged yet over here. Okay. Then if you're also making separate changes to other things in your main line, then the parallel line is going to go, oh, I don't like that. You have things over here that I don't have over here. Okay. So the parallel line can be finicky. You want to use it for the purpose that you've generated it for and then delete it. You can always trigger a new parallel line to be generated at any point in the future. So if you are using it specifically to roll out a new country, generate your parallel line. Don't do anything in the main line. Like leave this one alone. Roll out your new country over here, merge it back with your main line, and then delete the parallel line. Okay. If you, like, let's say that somebody went into the main line, and while I was working on Germany over in parallel, let's say that somebody tweaked some of our, like our org structure for the US, okay, or some configuration activities over here. We can then merge the mainline back with parallel to copy those things because basically we're going to get error messages and to resolve those error messages. So let's say that we entered some additional configuration activities over here. I can then select, there's a button that I can select to do what's called rebase. And rebase would copy whatever I've done over here back into the parallel line to address those error messages. All of the functions for parallel line are available in the settings area of CBC. So we'd go to settings, then we see the button to rebase and the button to merge. Okay, so rebase is basically copying things from mainline back into parallel. Merge is copying things from parallel back into the mainline. Uh, this actually can go away. I'm going to delete this slide because you used to be able to request a merge through SAP for me, but now you can request the merge simply by pressing the button in CBC. So that's not relevant anymore. Now, here's an example of a conflict. So this says a conflict has occurred. You must add proactive maintenance for HI to this project. Okay, so it looks like in this screenshot, we are in the main line. This means that somebody in the parallel line has gone into the parallel line and activated a scope item that doesn't actually exist for the same country in the main line. So you're going to get these things like conflicts as things are different between the two of them. Again, if you are rolling out a new country version in your parallel line, I would just say get that thing up and running, get all of that set up, focus on that. Don't do anything in the main line during that time. And once you're fully done with that new country in the parallel, then merge it back into the main line. You'll get a few conflict messages here or there in your main line because it's basically it's connected to the parallel, like it's noticing that there's changes there. But that's okay. You can ignore those if you are in the middle of rolling out a new country. Uh, all right. So conflicts detected during scoping, more details can be found in the scope app. So you can have conflicts related to scoping. Basically, a scope item is not the same between the two of them. You can also, from the notifications area, get these issues. An issue has occurred, so merge or rebase was not completed because there were discrepancies in the main and project line. So please navigate to the conflicts tab to resolve the conflicts and perform the operation again. Okay, so you'll end up having a little conflicts tab over here. If there are conflicts, it will show up. There will be a tab that shows up that says, these are the list of conflicts. So here's an example of that conflicts tab showing up. It might say billing for blocking reasons. I detected that somebody basically went into the configuration activity for billing block reasons, and they made a change in one system, but not the other system. And now you're trying to maybe merge the content between the two of them. But the two systems are not able to merge with each other because there's some random discrepancies. Okay. So if there are conflicts, those have to be resolved before we can merge or rebase between the two of them. So basically you want to work in one line at a time and then merge or rebase back to the other. Okay. I see a comment, the BC business configuration set is for the source system. Okay, thank you for answering that. So that's what that business configuration BC set button was referencing the source system. And yes, I mean, normally if we had more time, we could play around. You could use Joule. We could look up in the help portal what that BC set meant. Okay, developer extensibility code written in ABAP will stay inside the development tenant. And let's say production system will use that code from the development tenant when that specific function or script is required to run, or will the ABAP code actually move to test or production? So if we go back here, there are separate applications to release the different types of extensions from each one of these systems. So for the customizing tenant, I don't have my transport graphic in this deck apparently. But from the customizing tenant, we basically use customizing requests, which is for like business configuration, usually data from central business configuration. It can also be like teams and responsibilities or workflows. that we build in the customizing tenant. We also can release software collections from the customizing tenant. Software collections would be a custom field, custom business logic, even creating a custom business role. Those are all part of the extensibility framework. Adding a header, logo, footer to a form, all part of extensibility framework. Things from the development tenant are workbench requests. So there's different apps to release the different types of extensions from each tenant. There's only one app that needs to be used to always import the extensions. So they can be released as long as they are released. They kind of sit in this waiting room area and they're waiting to be imported to the next system. So if I go into my test system and I have extensions that are software collections, I have customizing requests, and I have workbench requests, I can import all three types of those into the test tenant with this import collection app. So there's only one app that consumes all three types of extensions, and same for production. Import collection imports all three types. Okay, is the parallel line kept in sync with all the changes being made in the run phase with the main line, or is it a one-time sync? It is a manual sync. So the sync is the merge or the rebase. So parallel line is a copy, it's a snapshot in time. So parallel line is a snapshot in time of this workspace to generate this workspace over here. Okay. Now, anything I do in the parallel line from now forward will not be kept in sync with the main line. And that's the purpose. That's why you want it, right? Especially to roll out a new country version. So I activate my new country, all the business processes, configuration values, org structure, everything. I then would manually select the button that says merge, and that will take everything I've done over here and copy it, literally merge it back into this workspace. Then they would be back in sync again. Okay, is there any date time for how long a parallel line will stay active? It stays active until you delete it. So you have it until you delete it. And you can only have one parallel line at a time. Is it technically or practically possible to have multiple parallel lines? Nope, just one parallel line at a time. And only with three system landscape. You cannot have parallel line with two system landscape. It doesn't work. Because two system landscape doesn't have these customizing tenants, and two system landscape also does not have central business configuration. So fundamentally, it does not work with two system. Okay, and will rebase overwrite previous scoping done in the parallel line? Nope. Rebase and merge are just two different ways of bringing these two back in sync with each other. So rebase is if I entered a configuration value in my CBC workspace that's connected to the main line. And then I want to rebase, I want to push it, copy it over to the parallel line. If I entered a configuration value in the parallel line and I want to copy it back to the main line, I would use merge. Just the two buttons are because it's one process is mainline to parallel, the other one is parallel back to main. So it's not going to, the only way it would overwrite anything is if you made edits to the same configuration activity. Like if you deleted something in a configuration activity, then I guess it's not really overwriting. It's just maybe deleting that thing. But it's not going to like get rid of anything that you've previously done in your main line. So it's not like when I merge my new country of Germany that's fully configured over here, when I merge this back to main, it's not like it would erase everything we've done for the US because that would completely be pointless, right? So everything we do over here would stay as is. It's just that this is giving us a space to roll out an entirely separate country without affecting our main line at all. Okay, is the terminology tenant identical with the terminology for client, or is there any other meaning of tenant? Generally, we use them kind of interchangeably. So customizing tenant is basically indicating that it's a separate container within the same system. So two separate tenants within the development system, or in this case, if you had parallel line, there's three separate tenants that are in the same container of the development system. The client part of it also is referring to what it's used for. So client 100 is always your main project that is always connected to the test and production systems. The development tenant is kind of like fundamentally separated from the customizing tenant over here. So you can develop ABAP extensions and they're not going to show up over here in customizing and vice versa. So they're more like separate containers. And then is there any possibility of restoring point creation before a merge? So in case of deleting and if you want to restore to an older point before the parallel line merge, no. Once you merge, the things are merged together and you can't unmerge them. Okay. So that is our parallel line. Again, you probably won't end up using this during your implementation unless you're doing a multi-country rollout. It's more so like when we do advertising and live sessions and when we talk about parallel line in more detail, it's often positioned more to the customers because it's more so something to use after you've already gone live with at least one primary country and you're looking at maybe rolling out a second country, or you need a separate test system or something along those lines. So it's usually positioned a little bit more towards the customers. You might need to use this if you are doing a multi-country rollout in your implementation. It will help you and just kind of make things a little bit easier, especially if they've fully gone live with your first country already, and then you're working on a separate country. All right, that is all I have for you in today's session. I will send you on your way with some silly fun facts. I will stop the recording and we'll do last call for questions.